What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to Spawn Guides. This is the series where I cover all of the most common spawn locations, as well as how they behave on several different game modes in Black Ops 3. In today's episode, we're going to be covering how spawns work in free-for-all, using Stronghold as our example. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so I've taken a bit of a break from this series, so for anybody that is new to the channel and hasn't seen the rest of this series, I have already covered a few other game modes. I will leave a link to that down below. And basically the way I'm organizing this is I'm covering several different game modes first, and each episode is going to be going into great detail into how the spawns work for that particular game mode. And for all of these, I'm using Stronghold as our example map. And then down the road, what I'm planning on doing is just going over every single map, and in each episode I'll cover several different game modes within that one episode, but I'll just kind of skim through it a little bit faster because you guys will have that base of knowledge that you get from these first initial episodes. So like I said, today we're going to be covering how free-for-all spawns work. With this game mode, spawn knowledge is really what separates those players that basically never lose or very rarely lose games from the less consistent players that maybe pull off the odd win every now and then, but they're not winning like every single game of free-for-all that they play. Spawn knowledge is huge in free-for-all. And it's also quite simple. The game will spawn you at the safest possible spawn that is the furthest away from enemies. It's as simple as that. Now this doesn't mean you'll never spawn close to an enemy. That definitely happens, especially on the smaller maps. But that's more often when there's no other safe spawn available, so it's still the safest spawn, even though it isn't really a safe spawn. So just be aware of that. Spawn prediction in free-for-all, if you're looking at an overhead map, it's very, very easy to pick where the guy is going to spawn next, because you just have to look for a pocket on the map where there's a spawn location, and the biggest pocket that's furthest away from any other players, that's where the next spawn is going to be. It's honestly just as simple as that for free-for-all. Now also you do have to consider line of sight, so you could be far away, but if you have a direct line of sight on a spawn, then that spawn will generally be blocked off. So just keep that in mind. But a really common myth that a lot of people are probably thinking of right now when I said that it always spawns you in the safest possible area, you're probably thinking, well, what about the revenge spawn mechanic? The revenge spawn mechanic, just in case you guys don't know, is something that people seem to think is in the game that will basically force you to spawn right next to the enemy that killed you, or near the enemy that killed you, or vice versa. If you kill an enemy, then there's some sort of mechanic in the game that will make sure that he spawns near you. This mechanic is a myth. It simply does not exist. I've done tons and tons of analysis of the spawns, just watching how the spawns are working and behaving, and there's nothing whatsoever to indicate that this system exists. Now, there definitely are going to be situations where you do spawn near the enemy that just killed you. That does happen quite often. But there's nothing that's forcing you to spawn there. It's just that oftentimes, when an enemy kills you, they just came from an area, they moved towards you and killed you, and as they moved towards you, they opened up a pocket behind them. Now this pocket right here is a nice safe area, so as they kill you, then you might end up spawning in that pocket, and oftentimes you do. This isn't because there's some sort of artificial system that's saying, okay, I have to spawn this player near the guy that just killed him. It's simply that that is actually the safest place on the map, and it does happen a fair amount. Just note that if there is a bigger, safer area with a spawn location in it, you're going to spawn in that area no matter what. Even if it's across the map, it's always going to choose the safest possible spawn. So let's bring up the spawn map for Stronghold. As you can see, there aren't really a ton of spawn points, and keep in mind, these are the spawns that are happening like 95 to 99% of the time. It is possible to spawn at other locations on the map, but it happens so rarely that it's not even worth confusing yourself over. Just focus on these spawns here. One thing you might notice is that pretty much all of the spawns are around the edges of the map, and there aren't any spawns towards the middle of the map. This trend holds true for most of the maps in the game. There are very few free-for-all spawns that are going to be anywhere on the middle of any of the maps. And that's something that's really important to note. Generally, the middle of the map is kind of a safe area, at least when it comes to spawns. Obviously, enemies can come off spawn and push towards the middle of the map. But if you're in the middle of the map, you're usually not in danger of anyone spawning behind you or anything like that. Also, you'll notice the spawns are typically either on one end of the map or the other end of the map. Even towards the edges, but in the middle of the map, you aren't really seeing any spawn locations. So typically this is what happens. You'll have one fight going on one half of the map and another fight going on in the other half of the map. This also holds true with a lot of the maps in the game, especially when you get the more linear maps, like Stronghold for instance, or Exodus, lots of those sorts of maps where they've got a really strong concentrations of spawns on the ends of the map, and not too much going on towards the middle. So really, there's not much else to say about that, so let's get straight into the examples. So with this right here, an enemy gets killed, and there's an enemy currently waiting to respawn. Where is he going to respawn? Where is the safest place that he can respawn, also keeping in mind where that spawn map is? I'll give you guys a few seconds to make a decision. Alright, so if we play it ahead, you can see that he spawns right up here. Now, why did he spawn there? Well, in order to do that, let's dial it back to right before he spawned, and let's just have a look at the map right now. Where is the biggest pocket where there's no enemies, where there's also a spawn point? It's actually pretty simple. If you just look at the map and try to find the area where no enemies are, you can see this big pocket right here. No enemies are anywhere near that. No enemies have a line of sight on that. That is the safest point on the map to be spawning an enemy based on where the spawn locations are. And, of course, that's where it spawns them. Moving on to the next example, this one's going to be a whole lot more difficult, but I just wanted to point out here before anybody dies, there's a little battle going on between these two people right here, and one of these guys dies. Nobody else on the map dies, so it's one of these two guys is going to be respawning. Where will he respawn based on everything that you can see on the map right now? Again, I'll give you guys a few seconds. If you need to pause it, take a second to pause it and just make your decision. So if we play it ahead, you'll see that he spawns all the way over on the right-hand side of the map here. Now, some of you guys are maybe a little bit confused here. You might be wondering, why did he not spawn in one of these two areas here? Because there are decent-sized pockets over here where there are spawn points. Well, the simple fact is, the pocket that's on the right-hand side of the map is a much bigger pocket and therefore a much safer area for him to spawn. And this is where you can really see that that revenge spawn system simply doesn't exist. If there was a revenge spawn system, the game definitely would have picked one of the spawns that are in the yellow pocket areas. These spawns are completely safe spawns, there's nothing wrong with anybody spawning there, but they aren't the absolute safest spawns on the map. It's actually the spawn all the way on the right-hand side of the map that is the absolute safest, and this is where you can really see that the game always picks the safest spawn no matter what. So I just wanted to show you guys those two examples to give you a better indication of how that spawn system actually behaves and everything. But as we all know, you don't have a full view of the map like that when you're in-game, so it isn't really the most practical thing. Like I said, it was just kind of to hammer down that knowledge so you can understand how the spawn system works. When you're actually in-game, what do you do with this spawn knowledge? Well, basically, the best way to do it, and this is what a lot of the top players will do, this is what I do whenever I'm playing free-for-all game modes, is I'll rotate between 2 to 3 spawn points. I know those spawn points in my head, I memorize them, I know where they are, and I'll just rotate back and forth. So I'll come from one area, I'll push up, and just see if somebody happened to just spawn at one of those spawn points. Once I do that, I can turn around and I rotate back to a different spawn point and see if anybody just recently spawned there. Then I rotate back, and I just go back and forth like that between 2 to 3 different spawn points. And by doing this, you're bound to be catching people just as soon as they spawn. Like, they'll spawn and then they'll sprint straight out of spawn, because that's what most people do when they spawn in. They'll sprint straight out of spawn, and if you're constantly rotating to these different spawn points, you're bound to be catching people just as they come out of spawn, and they're usually just free kills for you. This is why I'm able to be so successful when I play free-for-all game modes, particularly like gun game, for instance. When I'm playing gun game on stream, which I do play a fair amount when I'm streaming, you guys will probably notice that I almost never lose the game. And if I do, I'm going to be second place. I actually have like a 48 win-loss ratio in gun game, just by implementing these techniques of moving back and forth between 2 to 3 different spawn points, knowing those spawn points in my head, which is what I'm going to be sharing with you guys throughout this series. Once you know those spawn points and you know how to rotate around them, you're going to be much more successful in this game mode. So the final little point that I wanted to cover here before I wrap it up is, what about those bad spawns? Because there's still a lot of skeptics that pop up in these episodes, and I feel you. I do know what you guys are talking about. Those bad spawns absolutely do happen in free-for-all. A lot of the times you'll spawn right in front of a guy's line of sight, or something stupid like that, or right around a corner from a guy. This does happen, and this isn't necessarily due to the spawn logic itself being an issue. It's more so the map design and the spawn layout. The way Call of Duty works is when you hit that respawn button, it is going to respawn you somewhere. And if there are no safe spawns available, well, too bad, you're going to be spawning in an unsafe spawn. It doesn't have a system that'll pop up when you try to respawn and say, sorry, there's no safe spawns available, just hold on for a couple seconds, and we'll wait till one pops up that's safe, and then we'll spawn you there. It doesn't have that system. It has to spawn you somewhere, and because of the way that the maps and the spawn locations are laid out, sometimes there simply aren't any safe spawns available. So that's the explanation for all of those spawns that you get that are kind of ridiculous and they are kind of terrible. This particularly happens usually within the first like 10 to 15 seconds of a free-for-all match. You guys have probably noticed this even over the past few years. It's happened in Call of Duty. When you first start a free-for-all match and somebody dies, where's it going to spawn them? A lot of the times with these maps, when you first start out the match, everybody's already spawning at the common spawn locations or all of the spawn locations, and therefore if one person dies, he's got nowhere that's safe to spawn because there's still all those people that are nearby to the spawns that they just came out of. And this is why spawns are often so chaotic within that first 10 to 15 seconds. So I just wanted you guys to know that I do understand that those terrible spawns exist, but that's simply because there is no safer spawn available. So that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Spawn Guides. From here on out, I decided what I'm going to be doing is focusing on each map individually and covering the 3 game modes that I've already covered. So Team Deathmatch, Domination, and Free-for-all. I realized that I mentioned that I was planning on covering more game modes within this for each episode, but I've been thinking about how much extra work that would be and how long those episodes would be, and it's simply too much per episode. So I know a lot of people wanted to see Hardpoint. I'm still planning on doing like a general Hardpoint spawn guide, but I'm not going to be covering Hardpoint for each individual map, so I hope you guys can understand that. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.